Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting with the Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee. Once again, like all meetings at the moment, it's been held with members working remotely from home or other venues. So we're relying on technology, so please bear with us if anything freezes or goes wrong. For the benefit of anyone who's watching online, just to give you some introductions, my name is Councillor Richard Butler. I'm the chairman of the Planning Committee, and with me, or with us this evening, is Councillor Mrs Stockwood, my vice chairman, and Councillors Clark, Goland, Healy, Major, Mason, Murray, Purdue-Horan, Thomas, and we're expecting Councillor Verdi to join us as well. We have officers with us. We have Mrs Sells, who is the Borough Solicitor, Mr Pegram, Service Manager for Communities, and Mr Cox, the Principal Area Planning Officer. Now, before we go into the meeting and the next item, agenda item, I'm sure that we're all very, very saddened to read and hear of the news of the passing of our colleague and friend Dave Mitchell, who was unfortunately he was ill, but we know that he passed away just over a week ago. And I think most of us knew him, and I know colleagues, staff at the council knew and worked with him very, very closely for many years, and some of we members as well have knew Dave for a long time as well. I worked with him closely as we prepared for the new way of working in the planning committee a couple of years ago. So with that in mind, I think with your permission, I think I'd just like to allow a minute's thought and moment in to remember Dave. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we'll go into the items on the agenda, and also just to remind colleagues, of course, and guests that this is in fact a continuation, in effect, of our meeting from 2 weeks ago, which we ran out of time. So the items on tonight's agenda were the ones that we're going to discuss then. So item 1 is apologies for absence and any substitute members, please. I don't think there are any, are there?
Yeah, no apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. And anyone have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Anything to say? I suspect not. No? Okay, thank you. So we go into the first of our planning applications for tonight. We have 3 applications to go through, and the first one is land north of 18 Gladstone Avenue, Goton. And Mr Pegram is going to talk us through this. So Mr Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just bring up the presentation on the screen, which hopefully you can all now see. So, yes, as you say, the first application relates to an area of land on Gladstone Avenue. It's a roughly rectangular piece of land north of number 18. This is Gladstone Avenue, which is in turn accessed off of East Street through here. That's the aerial photograph showing the same location in relation to the context of the area. And then just to take you through some photographs of the site for the plans. This is approaching along East Street from a westerly direction, excuse me, showing the junction with Gladstone Avenue. That's then stood at that junction looking southerly down Gladstone Avenue, and the site is just down here, roughly where I'm indicating on the photograph. You'll note the properties on this side of the road don't have any off-street parking. They do benefit, or some of them do benefit from parking from the rear off of Wallace Street. And that's the junction of East Street and Wallace Street. So Gladstone Avenue is there. This is the backs of the properties that front onto the eastern side of Gladstone Avenue. Now taking you up to the site, this is the site frontage here, neighbouring property to the south, number 18. Again, just showing a slightly different view and relationship with that property. That's looking into the site. So 18 is to the left in this picture and number 8 is to the right. And then back out on the street, looking back down the road and the frontage of the site on the left. That shows you the gable end of number 8. And again, stepping further back to the south, looking across the frontage of the site. So number 18 is here, number 8 and the application sites in here. That's looking out of the site across the properties on the opposite side of the road, and then with a more direct view of the properties directly opposite the application site. And again, turning around, slightly different view there of the properties on the opposite side. Stood within the site, more towards the back boundary, looking forward towards the road. And then again, turning around gradually as we go around in an anti-clockwise direction, picking up number 8. Now towards the rear boundary here. That's the bottom end of the garden of number 8. That's the bottom, the western boundary of the application site. And then turning around to look back up at number 18 here. Number 18 again. And then just a shot across the site. So application as originally submitted was proposal for 3 dwellings in the format that you see before you. So there were 2.5-storey accommodation within the roof space. All the properties had an undercroft parking area in front of the property there. And I think all were 3-bedroom properties. That proposal was considered to be unacceptable, Chairman, partly because of the clutter in the roof by virtue of the dormers, and also the change in height, not considered to be in keeping or sympathetic to the prevailing pattern and character of development on the street. Interestingly, though, Chairman, I will mention at this point, you'll see from the history of the site, 2008, a very similar scheme to this was approved with 2.5-storey accommodation with dormers in the roof. That permission has now lapsed. This is the scheme which is now before members. So the main changes are that the dormers and the second floor accommodation has been removed, so giving a less cluttered roofscape. The 2 properties here still benefit from an undercroft parking. It's been removed from this property. The ridge has been reduced so that it's closer to the neighbouring property, and then steps down on this side to number 8 here. That's the rear elevation. So the only dormer which remains is a 1st floor dormer in that location there. No windows to either gable end. The properties are now a 3-bedroom property on the end. So this is a 3-bedroom property, and these 2 would be 2-bedroom properties. That's the proposed site layout. So effectively, the properties would be set back from the road's edge, have the parking there and in front of the properties. The property on the right there would have 2 parking spaces in the front. And you can probably just make out from that that they have submitted tracking diagrams to show that vehicles could still emerge from those properties, notwithstanding the fact that there are parked vehicles on the opposite side of the road. Chairman, this is a site which is within Gotham. It's in an area, obviously within the built-up area of the village. Obviously, planning permission has previously been granted, and given the location of the site in the built-up area, the principle of development is considered to be acceptable. The main issues for consideration for you this evening relates to the design and appearance of the buildings, impact on the amenities of the area, impact on the amenities of neighbouring properties either side of the site, and obviously highway safety matters. Chairman, those have all been looked at very carefully by your officers and the consultees and are detailed in the report. And the application has been found in its revised form to be acceptable and is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we have two speakers on this item. We have Mr. Asher, who is hopefully with us, I think. I think I saw his name. Yes, Neil Asher is on the system, who wishes to speak in objection to the application. Mr. Asher, I don't know whether you know, but you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. And if you're still speaking in 5 minutes, we just have to tell you time is up. So
no problem.
As soon as you're ready, you can start talking to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the County Council planning. And I wish it to be known that I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of Gladstone Avenue, and I would like to make it clear now that we're not opposed to the building of the land adjacent to which is actually my property, but we feel that there would be more considerations to the plans and to the build, because I don't think it's gone far enough, if we're honest. I have several pictures. You put them in a slightly different order, but picture one will show, so I'll just refer to my plans. Picture one is the overbearing aspect that we're seeing here. If you see that there is a 2 metre width from the gable end, so from the gable end, although Mr. Skillington has amended these heights down to 8.8 metres now, we still have concerns with both from the properties on this side of the road, the overbearing, and certainly from the properties on the left-hand side where I am. So I have a window on the left-hand side, which I appreciate that he can build up to the boundary, but I just want to question if it's acceptable, for that. I know I have no right of light, but and there's no windows on his property, but I have a window on my property. So I just want to look at that and just mention that as a real concern. If I could go at the pictures in slightly different order. So if we go to, right, we're going to give me that one. You're throwing me completely now, aren't you?
Apologies.
Don't worry. I'll do it if you bear with me. I've only got 3.5 minutes left, which is pick 2. I think this is pick 2. This highlights the concerns where we appreciate, I haven't already mentioned it, but you'll see that additional 6 cars. And so this road here, this highlights on the red is where we have parked cars, red lines of parked cars on a typical day. So you enter from Nottingham Road along Wallace Street, there's a 90-degree turning angle onto East Street, then there's another 90-degree turning angle onto Gladstone Avenue, which, it does affect the bins. We know that one, and I'll reference that one if I have time, but it's the emergency vehicle piece that we have a real concern with. And I will please note that we had a resident 3 months ago on number 15 on Gladstone Avenue, an ambulance couldn't gain access. And when I show you another picture, you will see why. So I feel this is a major concern when deliberating and potential consequences if it gets passed without us making these due considerations for emergency vehicles that cannot get access. You will see there, this is around the bins, and I think on one of the reports, it tells you that the bin access made is actually is collection of the bins on East Street. They're not actually the weight on East Street, yes, and it's 81.2 meters from the properties. So that's where the bins will. I know that's just sort of quite trivial, but if you show for another picture, and this is the major point that we really want to raise, this is Gladstone Avenue. The pictures you saw earlier were lovely, it's great, but this is the reality potentially over a weekend. If we had another 6 cars to that one potentially on the 3 properties that we'd added into it, it's the turning space isn't right. If you look, I appreciate I've got a minute left, but there's 17 properties on this. There's no turning space. I don't think it may have been mentioned, but it's certainly in the plans. There's a brick wall at number 20. So there's no turning space. It's not a cul-de-sac with a turning space. It's an end. So you have to reverse back. So, and I think that's just a real concern. There's another picture showing that from the other side of a land view, and you'll see property number 18. But again, the problems there. And I think our real concern is that the committee, point 6 of the committee report says about there have been revised changes, and it is a real concern. They're talking about the vehicle access and egress based upon the plan VED 64401B, if you get access to that one. And if you bear with me on this one, I know I've got 30 seconds left, but if a car drives into plot 2 and there is a car parked outside, I can't see how this vehicle can reverse out in order then to go forward without having to trespass onto the driveway of plot 1. Bear with me, which may well have a car parked on it. Plot 3 potentially, maybe even trickier. So if you have 2 cars parked side by side, as per the new plan, it's far less room to manoeuvre. Plot 1 looks a little bit easier, so it's closer to me. You could drive in forward and park and reverse back out towards number 80. That's my time up. But you're going to have to take the lamppost. I believe the lamppost out. Sorry, not the lamppost. The BT post will have to be removed. So I've probably done my time there, Mr. Chairman. But there are a few concerns, slightly in a different order to what I had. So I apologise.
No need to apologise, Mr. Asher. That was very clear and very succinct. And
Very kind. You're very kind.
No, don't worry, it was clear. So thank you for that. And our other speaker on this is the ward member, Councillor Rex Walker. So, Councillor Walker, please.
I'm not allowed to start my video. Do you want me in silence, or do you want?
Sorry, hang on 1 second.
Well, no, we want to see you, Councillor Walker. We want to hear you as well. Oh, there you are.
I haven't managed a haircut, so perhaps you'll regret that. But anyway, thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. In considering this application before you this evening, I ask you to consider very carefully the highway factors involved. You've heard in the officer's report the avenue is narrow to approximately 4.6 metres, no through route or turning facility, and seen that the eastern end of the road is usually taken up by significant on-street parking. With the average UK car width being in the region of 1.7 metres, this leaves under 3 metres of road for other vehicles to pass. This scheme involves vehicles parking at the proposed dwellings, manoeuvring onto and off the avenue. With an average car length of 4.5 metres, I invite you to consider the practicalities involved with the proposed parking arrangements. I appreciate swept path analyses have been provided, but these leave me wondering how the vehicles will manoeuvre safely, particularly those of plot nearest number 8, especially when there is already a vehicle parked in the other space. I would direct you towards the Highways Officer's original consultation response and respectfully suggest that they had it right the first time in saying, quote, "The layout should be reviewed to ensure 2 usable parking spaces are provided per plot, with sufficient space to ensure vehicles will be able to enter and exit space at all times, taking into account the presence of on-street parking. Consideration should be given to the provision of a shared access and turning area to enable vehicles to enter and exit the site in a forward gear. The plans before you this evening do not include such provision." The committee report directs you towards paragraph 109 of the MPPF, stating that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. In the absence of definitions of both road network and severe, it is for you to assess the impact. The road network, as you've heard, in the immediate vicinity already struggles to cope at present. E Street, onto which Gladstone Avenue opens, is narrower still than Gladstone Avenue, and both routes to the main Nottingham Road via both Meadow End and Wallace Street suffer similar issues, with safe exit onto Nottingham Road being of significant concern to local residents. This is of particular significance when assessing cumulative impact, as the existing situation, in my assessment, is already severe. A transport assessment considering the likely impacts of development has not been prepared, and therefore the committee, in my view, is open to refuse permission based on the concerns about the absence of evidence showing an absence of harm. I would draw your attention to the paragraphs either side of 109 in the MPPF. 108B states that in assessing sites that may be allocated for development in plans or specific applications for development, it should be ensured that safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved for all users. Are these access arrangements suitable? The spaces would not be easy to enter and exit. The stacking elements of provision on 2 plots means that the last vehicle in needs to be the first vehicle out. Please consider the likely day-to-day outcome of this, additional on-street parking, which the avenue and surrounding streets cannot accommodate. Paragraph 110 goes on to say, inter alia, that development should, quote, create places that are safe, secure and attractive, which minimise the scope for conflicts between pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles, and allow for the efficient delivery of goods and access by service and emergency vehicles. It's a shame that the word neighbours are not included within the list of groups with whom conflict should be minimised, since I fear I know how this story ends should the development be permitted with these parking and access arrangements. Whilst considering impact of the development on neighbours, I ask you to also consider the siting of the buildings in relation to the existing neighbouring dwellings. The proposed dwellings fit well back into the plots in comparison to the adjacent properties. The dwelling on the right's front elevation starts almost at the rear elevation of number 8 and extends significantly beyond it, taking up half the length of the garden. This would create a significantly overbearing impact on these neighbours, especially considering the narrow gap between the existing and proposed dwellings. So in conclusion, there are ample grounds in planning terms to support a refusal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker. Thank you for that. That was very clear. So yes, we heard from Mr. Archer, Mr. Usher, and who's speaking on behalf of himself as a neighbour, but also on behalf of other residents of the road and area. He pointed out that they're not necessarily opposed to building or development on the site, but he doesn't think it's had enough consideration. And we saw from pictures his concerns and in particular the impact of extra cars and especially when there are cars already parked on the road. Told us about the narrowness of the road and the tight junctions from the nearby roads that lead into it. And also gave us an example of difficulty for emergency vehicles and other large vehicles to get along there, and also the fact that the distance from to collect the bins for the bin lorry is something like 81 metres. And he also reminded us that it's a cul-de-sac and there's no actual turning head at the end of the road. And Councillor Walker also picked up on the highway points and with regards to the width of the road and the impact of the existing on-street parking from other cars and vehicles. He's concerned that additional cars from this development will make life very difficult both for existing residents, but also it won't be particularly easy for people who live in the new properties. He also thinks that the original Highways Department comments were probably more accurate or correct than the current ones on the revised application. He also referred to National Planning Policy Framework paragraphs regarding development and severe impact on existing and neighbouring properties. And also he says there's no transport assessment in place and there's no allowance shown for safe access for other vehicles, pedestrians and other road users to ensure minimum conflict. And also as well, he picked up on overbearing for neighbours, both adjacent and across the road. So I think that's picked up the points from our speakers. Mr. Pegram, if you'd like, do you want to come back on any of those, please?
Briefly, Chairman, just on a couple of points there. I think there was reference to the problems with emergency access on the road. That appears to me, Chairman, to be an existing problem. And that clearly, what members must consider is whether or not there would be any exacerbation or significant change in that respect. But as I say, we can't expect applications to address existing problems. I think I picked up from your summary as well that I didn't pick up initially, sorry, that Councillor Walker refers to no transport assessment being provided. Clearly this is a minor scheme for only 3 dwellings. We wouldn't expect a transport assessment with this type of application. And I guess you know what I'm going to say, that if you note from the report, Highways do not object now. So clearly they have looked at the scheme. We do not have, in terms of any concerns over Highways, we do not have the support of the technical consultee. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Well, of course, technically it could be seen as a minor impact, but that's not necessarily the opinion of of people living nearby. So anyway, we're coming into discussion and decision. So would anyone like to start with any questions or comments? Councillor Thomas, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I have been to have a look at this site, and it's a little street that's got quite a lot of character. The houses have got a lot of similarities, and they've got a sort of theme towards them. And I don't believe that this scheme would be in keeping with the character of the street scene. For two major reasons, really. I think they've now addressed the sort of massing issues, but the houses are set far back from the road because of the parking issue, which has two impacts, really. One is it takes them out of line with the other houses, and this is a street that the houses are very much in line on the street. And the other reason is, the other thing that causes is shadowing on the back gardens, as Councillor Walker said. So the positioning of the houses is a problem for the street scene as well as everything else. And the other thing about the houses that affects the street scene is the fact that they've got these garages or carports in them, which is completely out of character with the houses. And we're not expecting, obviously, houses that match the others in all respects, but that is a feature that is completely out of character. The houses are basically they've obviously gone to a lot of trouble to provide 2 parking spaces for each house, but the impact of that on the street scene is the setting back and the presence of the carports. So in addition to the transport issues and the access issues, which I do think are severe, it is a very narrow street. I think there are also issues of keeping it in character and overshadowing. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. It's probably no need to come back on that at this point, unless no, I don't think so. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you. Could I just have another look? I think it was on the application sites, and that was of how the cars would turn and what their turning circle would be. There was like a ground plan.
The sweat
yes.
plan, I think they call it.
I have to put my glasses on.
Oh.
Yes, that was it. Are we talking about cars, fairly large cars, or cars of any size or whatever on that? Because actually that does look quite tight. Obviously they'd all be going the same way, because as you say, there is a brick wall at one end without a turning circle. Out of interest, what does happen to the waste lorries? How do they turn around, or don't they? Do they just go backwards all the way? It's mainly the cars. So are we saying then that on the 2 houses to the left, you could get 4 cars on that? Is that a car parking space in front of the carports, or is that where the dotted lines are? Is that another car space so that you could have 2 cars, one behind the other? Thank you.
Well,
Chairman, are there any queries? And I'll come back on all of them at the same time.
Yeah, we'll come back on that quickly, but I can see what you're asking there. Yes.
In which case, if there were more spaces, yes, I can see that perhaps there would be room for others, but obviously it is very tight there, and you would have to say that turning circle, the turning, is that a standard turning angle, or is it only for certain cars, so that if you have some sort of a van that is, I don't know, a plumber or somebody, electrician, man with a van, would he be able to park on that forecourt? That is really what I'm asking as well. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
No, thank you. So that's the size of the car parking area. I think, and I'm sure Mr. Pegler will confirm, but I think the dustbin lorry doesn't actually go down there. I think it parks up at the end of the road. We'll wait for clarification on that.
Chairman, just in terms of the car parking, I can't answer what vehicles these are. They are, I would say that they are tracked for a typical, car that you might own. You can see effectively there's 2 parking spaces in front of this property, and there would be on these properties, one in the Undercroft and one outside. Clearly, I am no highway engineer or traffic engineer, Chairman, but this has been looked at by the Highway Authority. They haven't raised any questions over the accuracy or the ability for vehicles to enter the site, other than to say that these additional details satisfied their concerns. Clearly, no, I wouldn't think you could get a white man van on the front of the property necessarily, but clearly, you've got to look at what the standard sort of requirements for a property of this nature would be. The other point I think was made somewhere, Chairman, about vehicles being able to turn on site, but in a road like this, there's no highway safety issues with the vehicle reversing into or out of parking spaces. Let me just take the zoom off of that.
I was just going to say, just before we went from there, I think one of Councillor Mason's other questions is where you can see in the proposed parking area, where so you've got the pink squares there. The car on the left, for example, that's underneath the covered over. Well, they're both under the covered over section.
Yeah.
And then there's then behind it, to the bottom of it, is a parking area. What's that bit of land to the left? I think Councillor Mason was asking about that, just to the left of where your mouse is.
I think that's all. Effectively, Chairman, the frontage of the properties would be hard surfaced. There is a little bit of landscaping shown here and here, but
that's where I'm thinking. So where your mouse is there is just to the left of where you are there. Is that hard standing or is that landscaping garden? That would be hard standing in my interpretation and understanding of the proposals, Chairman. So would it be conceivable that a car might be parked on there because so many people would park on the gardens, or don't they anyway? Clearly, Chairman, the benefit of having that hard surface is it opens up the frontage to make these manoeuvres somewhat easier. Clearly, I don't think looking at that, it's a bit tight to get a second car in alongside one park there. But as I say, ultimately, highways have raised no objection on parking or highway safety grounds. In terms of and helpfully the objector who spoke provided the plan, my understanding is you're correct, the bin lorry doesn't come up these roads because they're very narrow. Clearly, these properties on the eastern side of Gladstone Avenue are collected from the rear, whereas the existing properties and the proposed properties would have to drag their bins down. My understanding, I think, Chairman, from talking to the case officer, is that the bin crews do run backwards and forwards to collect the bins, but that's only what I've been told by the case officer. Thank you, Chairman. Right. So was that helpful, Councillor Mason? Your hand's still up, or is that from before? That's okay. I think it's a legacy hand.
That's from before.
Do you want to come back though on any of those?
Yes, I do really. I can't. I'm trying to think back over when I read it, because that's an awful lot of hard standing. Could you just remind me what sort of hard standing it is? That massive. Is it permeable or?
Chairman, if you want to carry on with the debate, I can come back on that issue rather than delaying your discussion.
Thank you. Okay, that's it then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mason. Right, don't see any other questions at the moment. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, this is obviously a very difficult application because, as Councillor Thomas identified, and I will emphasise, I've been down and I've walked down the street myself, and as she identified, actually it's a lovely street. nice houses of that period, examples of that period, which are extremely important. And I'm surprised actually in the site history it doesn't mention, because clearly, I have to assume that there were 2 pairs of semi-detached houses there at some stage in the past, not least because of the numbering of the houses gives rise to that. However, we are where we are. In terms of the emergency vehicles, as Mr. Pegram said, that is the current situation anyway. But I do have some questions. And I suppose, well, one of the overriding questions for me is, when you're talking about highways and you're talking about emergency vehicles, is will this development actually change any of the modus operandi of the current residents of the street? Now, in terms of things like emergency vehicles and waste collection, I don't believe anything will change from the current modus operandi, because they have those problems as it is. I think the issue seems to rest on this parking issue, and also on the setting back of the property. The diagram that Mr. Pegram had up with the parking tracking, etc. I did notice that the whoever made the drawing got their east and west the wrong way around. But notwithstanding that, we'll forgive them. Everybody makes mistakes. But the issue really that prompts me to refer to that is because the setting back of the 3-bedroom property will certainly overshadow the rear garden of number 8, because that's directly coming from the southern area. In the report, it does mention that PDR will be, or the permitted development rights of the carports, or permitted development rights will be removed to ensure the carports don't get, in inverted commas, filled in or become some other form of habitable room or store or whatever. However, it's all very well saying that, but 20 years, 30 years down the line, somebody puts the planning application in, and who knows, that may well get approved. We don't know. So I'm not clear that withdrawal of permitted development rights is actually forever. The actual parking places, I think it is very difficult, because those tracking movements, they rely on somebody being pretty computer accurate. No room for any slight mistake or slight tweak of a steering wheel. And in answer to Councillor Mason's question, what size cars are they? Well, they're car-sized, basically. And how long is a piece of string? So I think that the computer graphics are very much down to actual accuracy. And I do question whether, in fact, bizarrely, I can hardly find myself saying this, but the 3-bedroom property, because it is set back, whether it should even have any parking places, given that it is in a terraced and a very attractive terraced street. And clearly, as Councillor Thomas identified, this is changing the character of that street, which also leads me to my final question, I think, for Mr. Pegram. And forgive me if it was mentioned, because I've missed it, what materials are being proposed, because I would have, if it was approved, I would very much prefer that it was red brick, in keeping with the character of the existing properties on the street. But I am concerned at the setting back of this, because it does alter the character, and I'm concerned about the accuracy of that tracking. I think those are the 2 main points, really, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And actually, you asked a question that was going through my mind as well. I was keen to get some clarification of how the house numbering worked. and what may have been there in the past, because we can see the gap in the house numbers. But I'm sure.
Well, Mr. Chairman, two pairs of semis would fit in with the numbering, because it's 8, then you've got 10 and 12, 14 and 16 before we get to 18. So I'm assuming that's what was happening in the past.
I'm sure we will find out shortly. Councillor Golan, please.
Thank you. I think this is overbearing and the design is inappropriate. Again, it's another example of trying to get a quart into a pint pot, really. I agree, it does look like, if you look on the Google Maps, it looks like the two pairs of semis opposite would have filled in this space, but time has moved on. People have cars now, they didn't have when this was built 100 years ago. The undercroft, so-called undercroft, which is basically a ground floor space, it's just completely inappropriate. The setting back of the houses is completely inappropriate. I know the house next door, again on Google Maps, has a car parked on the forecourt, even though it's that narrow space. So bringing it forward, there would still potentially be space to park something out the front. The tracking is, it's all well and good, but as it's been said before, I wouldn't want to be trying to make that manoeuvre, I tell you. It doesn't look at all conducive to good neighbourliness in the long term when somebody crashes into the other person's car, which is bound in that scenario. I think it's just too much in that space. And again, it's a brownfield site, and it would be really good to develop it with a completely appropriate development.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goland. I don't see any other hands up at the moment. Do you want to come back on any of those points, please, Mr. Pegram?
Only really, Chair. I think there's some questions that were asked that require responses. If I come to the plan, bear with me. I think the question about the materials on the drive, all I can tell you, Chairman, there is a requirement of one of the conditions that the drive is a bound material, so not loose gravel or any material that could be pulled off onto the road. There is also, in terms of the materials, Chairman, condition 3 does require the submission of details of the materials, and clearly we would look to ensure that the materials were sympathetic with the surrounding properties. Councillor Clark made a point about the conversion of the carports. Now, clearly we've put on a restriction that they shall not be converted, and he's quite right that someone could in the future apply to convert one of those carports into an additional room or something. But clearly that would require planning permission, and that would have to be considered on its merits at that time, including the loss of what might be considered valuable parking space on this road. Just in terms, you can see the plan hopefully on the screen. The other concern that Councillor Clark raised is that this property is set back, and the impact on this one. Very keen eyes, he did pick up, as I did, that the east and the west are actually the wrong way round, but effectively the sun would rise over here and obviously set over there. You will note, probably from the design, that the orange sections are single-storey flat-roofed elements, and also the property on that end does step down. So there has been an attempt, in my view, Chairman, to address those concerns by minimising the impact. So again, you can see there, that's the lower section of roof, and that's the single-storey flat-roofed element on the rear. I think that probably addresses all the points that were raised, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Righty-ho. Well, I don't see any any comments or questions coming in, so we're looking for a decision here. So is anyone wanting to move this recommendation as per the report, or is someone possibly thinking of an alternative? Councillor Clark. Or then
to move things along, Chairman, let's test the water, because I was trying to hang back to see if anybody else came forward. But
your hand went up just literally a fraction of a second before Councillor Purdue-Horan. So.
Oh dear, what a shame. Anyway, just to test the water, let's because I am concerned about the character of the streets being altered, which Councillor Thomas mentioned at the beginning. So I think I'd like to propose that planning permission be refused on the grounds that the proposed properties will be out of keeping with the character of the existing properties on Gladstone Avenue. Secondly, that's the can't remember which plot number it was now. The one next to number 8. Anyway,
3, I think. Is that plot 3 with the?
Yeah, the one with the 3-bedroom property.
Yeah.
That will create an overshadowing and overbearing aspect onto number 8. And the third one, I'm not quite sure how this should be phrased, because I think that the fact that the proposed parking arrangements will exacerbate problems on Gladstone Avenue and are likely to lead to problems. And I think they are creating a proposal that's out of keeping with the current proposals. It's possible that maybe that should be linked in with my first reason, but the problem is, as far as I'm concerned, I think they're two distinct, because one is the character of the properties, and the other relates to the parking. So I think it's best if they're kept separate. But I'm most concerned, and I believe that the parking arrangements will create problems, and they're unacceptable parking arrangements, because they will give rise to severe manoeuvring problems, which I don't think a computer can sort out on Gladstone Avenue. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague, Councillor Clark, is extremely competent and is clearly able to do gymnastics on a sixpence when trying to explain this difficult situations. And this is a difficult application, because it all spins on the car parking issues. However, I think sufficient consideration has been given by professionals to advise this committee. And whilst I broadly agree with the comments that have been made, and have every sympathy with the objector and the local ward councillor, I think the developer has produced an extremely efficient use of land. Okay, you can't get a Cadillac on those car parking spaces, but I suspect it will be fairly easy to maneuver the small city type cars. And so where do you draw the line? I think that my personal view is that if we turn this down, it'll inevitably will go to appeal, and I'm not so certain that we're on very strong ground, despite, as I say, the very articulate proposals put forward by Councillor Clark. So I was going to actually move the recommendations as set out in the report.
Okay, thank you. Right, got that. And I've also, I've got Councillor Thomas's hand up there. So Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I'd like to second Councillor Clark's proposal, please. And I take issue with Councillor Purdue-Horan's comment that this application turns solely on the issue of parking. I think in trying to solve the issue of parking, what's happened is they've created something that just doesn't fit with the street scene and actually looks like a car parking solution with human living quarters attached. And I think that's the kind of, the compromise that's been reached. And it is completely out of character with the street scene. So I don't think it's just the parking issue that is the reason for refusal. And I support Councillor Clark's all three of the reasons for refusal. There is an issue with access and parking, but the main issue for me is the impact on the street scene by setting the houses back and by having the great gaping holes of these carports in the frontage on this very traditional terrace of Victorian houses. And the third reason is the overshadowing of number 8. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, so you have, so we had the recommendation, the first recommendation being made and seconded was from Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Thomas. So I think that's the one we have to discuss at the moment. Now, Mr. Pegram, you're just going to clarify that or pick up on that.
Chairman, just to come back on some advice for members and clarification, and just for confirmation from Councillor Clark, I've obviously been listening very carefully to the debate. Councillor Clark, in his first reason for refusal, said generally out of keeping with the character of the area. And I just want to seek confirmation that I've picked up what I think is being referred to, and that is the layout of the development being set back from the road, not typical of the neighbouring properties, and also the inclusion of those openings for the carports. Can I just have an indication if I have read that correctly, and that is what Councillor Clark is referring to as the matters of not in keeping, because clearly we have to frame a reason for refusal and be clear about why it's not in keeping with the area.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the point I'm really making is that the design and layout of the proposal is out of keeping with the and will be detrimental to the character of the current street scene.
Thank you for that clarification. And clearly, Chairman, my role is to advise you on the robustness of any reasons. And matters of design are subjective. They are for you as decision makers to rule on. Clearly, it's a difference of opinion. So it's a material reason for refusal. Not going to take odds with that. Similarly, Chairman, the impact on the neighbouring property is to some extent a matter of judgment. Clearly, your officer's view is that the buildings have been designed to try and minimise any overshadowing and overbearing impact. But again, I respect the views of the members, and I'm satisfied that if the application were to go that way, that is a material consideration, is a matter of subjective judgment, and I won't take issue with that. The one that, Chairman, I am concerned about is the parking issue in terms of the parking arrangements and the impact on highway safety. As I say quite often, we do not have support from the technical consultee, and clearly if we were to refuse permission on those grounds, we have to provide objective evidence to support those concerns. So clearly, Chairman, highways would not be able to support us with that reason. So if that were to remain, I guess I'm looking for a bit more help from members as to what that evidence might be that we would have to present to support a reason for refusal on those grounds. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, yes, I understand that. So a bit more evidence on the highway side of things. Councillor Mason.
Yes, thank you. Just for some clarification, on that street, are there any other houses that has off-street parking? Because I thought that most of them didn't. So you are setting up here, this is the first one that has actually had to reverse off their site. And I think that is the difficulty. If there wasn't and they had to, and it was like every other house, then they would either not have a car or something else would have to happen. Could you just clarify to me, are there any other houses with parking to that extent on it? And if there isn't, then yes, it is different from the rest of the street scene. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there is, but I'm sure Mr. Pegram will just
No, Chairman. I think looking back through the photographs, obviously the properties are very close to the roadside boundary. Number 18 does have an open frontage. It looks like it has a dropped curb. Whether they park parallel to the road, I cannot say. There's no car in the photographs that I'm looking at. So, but effectively, I think the question is, are there any other properties with parking layout that would be the same as this? And the answer is no to that. I know that obviously we always say to you, you must consider what is before you. And clearly what the applicant has presented here is a proposal which seeks to address what's clearly become quite a major issue in this application, i.e. the parking and access arrangements. Clearly, if this application is refused, it will no doubt come back to officers for negotiations potentially as to what could be built on the site. And I'm sensing to a certain extent that members are looking for something which mirrors more the area, i.e. properties situated close to the road, which then wouldn't be able to provide parking, certainly not in front, but possibly down the sides. But clearly, as I say, what they've sought to address is what is clearly quite a emotive issue in the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Councillor Government, please.
Just sort of coming back to the street theme, can you just explain to us, Mr. Pegram, the relevance of the housing line, which, as a sort of, lay person talking about housing, I thought was always critical, and clearly this plan breaks the housing line down the road.
Yes, Chairman. I think we all often hear reference to building lines. In this instance, there is a very strong building line, a very strong character in the area. But as I say, I've already said, to a certain extent, it's the interplay between the character of the area and seeking to try and address the parking issue. So yes, it does step back. I guess the issue is it's a relatively small street. We're not in a conservation area or an area which is particularly sensitive architecturally. Your officers didn't feel on this occasion that the setback and not following the rigid building line was necessarily an issue.
Okay, thank you. Right, got that. So Councillor Clark.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking this through, and in fact, if we strengthen the first reason and refer to the fact that the design and layout, in particular the setting back, is unacceptable and detrimental to the character of the street scene, that really, by implication, negates the parking, and therefore I think it would probably be in order to, I'd be interested to hear what my seconder's view is, but I would have thought it could be in order to delete the reference to the parking, because by virtue of the fact that the first reason is actually saying that the layout is out of character and unacceptable. So therefore that immediately implies that the parking is unacceptable as well. I'd just while I've got the floor briefly, Mr. Chairman, just make the comment that no matter if it was to be refused, then the applicant doesn't necessarily go to appeal. They may well decide, oh, let's look at it again and put in another application. So a refusal doesn't automatically signify an appeal. Thank you, Chairman.
Indeed, and indeed there has been quite a history of applications on that side. Councillor Thomas, what's your thought about Councillor Clark's comment there about maybe not majoring on the traffic on the parking side of things? Or microphone.
Right, I think the thing about the parking issue is the impact that it has on residents, existing residents and the residents of the new houses, to have these extremely difficult situations for the parking. There's no doubt that it's squeezed in as far as the parking is concerned. It's a very narrow road and it's already got parking down one side. There is very little room to manoeuvre, and okay, we're not building streets and houses for cars, but we are building them for people whose lives are going to be quite severely impacted by the difficulties that the cars cause on this street. So I don't know if that gives Mr. Pegram any other policies to hang the parking problems on, but I think many of us are concerned about the difficulty of the parking on the street as proposed. Thank you.
Does that give anything extra to hang on to, Mr. Pegram?
Well, Chairman, if I can come back and ask for clarification, because the way I read or interpreted Councillor Clark's motion with the parking issue is that it's about the, obviously there is only on-street parking on the road at the moment, and that it would exacerbate access and highway safety issues. That was, as I understood, the reason to refer to. And as I say, my only concern, Chairman, is that the applicant has sought to demonstrate that the turning works. Highways have considered that information. They don't object to the application, and therefore, in my view, it's a relatively weak reason for refusal.
But
can I just say, Chairman, that is this phrase "highway safety"? It's not the safety aspect specifically, unless you include scratching and denting other people's car doors, etc. It's a question of practicality, and I believe that this arrangement, to me, just providing a computer tracking, given and having walked down the road and seen it for myself, unless you are exactly following the dotted line of a computer tracking, it is impractical. It is an impractical arrangement. And I don't believe that it is an acceptable arrangement. Okay,
fine. That's your understanding and belief, and we will soon see what other colleagues think on that. So I think we've gone through quite a lot on this, and we've gone over some ground, no pun intended, a few times now. We've got a recommendation moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Thomas to refuse permission for the reasons just discussed. Mr. Pegram.
Sorry, Chairman, before you take the vote, which I think is where you're heading.
I am heading that way, yes.
Clarification from Councillor Clark. Is the reason on parking in or out then, please?
I think we keep it in on the basis that the proposals for parking present an unacceptable, impractical solution for which evidence of actual usage has not been provided, because the computer tracking is based on one size of car, and we have no possible way of legislating as to what size of car should actually be used.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking for an in or an out, to be quite honest, but thank you.
Well, you've got a full answer there.
Thank you.
Right, so you're clear on the reasons given there, Mr. Pegram. Colleagues, I think everyone's heard the arguments. I don't think anyone else is wishing to speak. So, Mrs. Sells, I think we better go to a decision, vote on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the motion to refuse permission against officer recommendation for those three reasons Councillor Clark outlined. Alphabetical as always. Councillor Butler.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Goldand.
4.
Councillor Healy.
4.
Councillor Major.
4.
Councillor Mason.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Murray.
4.
Councillor Perdue-Horan.
Against.
Councillor Stockwood.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
4.
And Councillor Verdi.
4.
Thank you all. That's 10 for, 1 against, so the motion carries.
So thank you very much for that. A big discussion, and so permission is refused, just to confirm. Thank you. We'll go on to our next application, which is, get my right papers here. This is 48 Main Street. And Councillor Thomas has to stand down from this, as she is one of the ward members for the area. So, well, she knows Scott anyway. So this is 48 Main Street, East Leek. And it's two applications in one. There's a demolition of an existing rear garage outbuilding and the erection of a new dwelling. and the demolition of an existing rear garage outbuilding. And Mr. Cox, I think you're leading us on this, aren't you? So over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just try and share my screen here. Can you confirm that you can see that? You got that? Good stuff. So yes, this site is number 48 Main Street in Eastleigh. The application site is a large parcel of land currently occupied by a residential dwelling. Main Street is along here. It's in the centre of Eastleigh and also falls within a conservation area. This is the main property. It's currently accessed from Main Street via vehicular access here and enjoys a rather large rear garden area here. Predominantly surrounded by residential properties around here and a few commercial outlets along Main Street. As you can see from the aerial photo here, here's the main access, an area of hard standing currently used as car parking and large garden, which is fairly heavily vegetated at the moment. So this is views along Main Street. These are the commercial properties in the centre of Eastleigh here. So this is the access to number 48 with the original walls here, and again, large screening to the front. You'll notice double yellow lines along Main Street. Looking in the opposite direction. Again, more site context from Main Street here. So here is the application site entrance. You can see it's bound with tarmac currently and a gate set back. These next photos move along the access and observe neighbouring properties as we move down the access here. Looking back at the access to Main Street. This is a building which I'll describe in a moment, which is actually being demolished to allow the access through to the rear part of the garden for this development. Here's some of the tree specimens here. The building in a little more detail. This is neighbouring property to the west. There it is again from the garden area and the applicant's property here. This is standing in the site now in the garden area, looking back towards number 48 and gives you a clear view really and a sense of scale of the size of the plot. This shows really the level of vegetation that currently within the site and the officer's site photos. This is one of the boundaries showing you the level of vegetation too. This is the current application site layout. So you have the access coming down off Main Street here. Here's the building which I noted. Access comes through to a parking area here. Again, garden area and heavily tree-lined area at the bottom here. So moving to what's before you this evening, as the chairman suggests, there's two applications, both are for planning permission. One is for relevant demolition of the garage building, which I showed you in the photographs here. And the other one is for the erection of a new residential property in this parcel of land here. To describe that, this garden will remain for number 48, as will the front area. The access will be shared to a point down to here. And as you can see, the turning facilities there remain for number 48. The drive will then continue down into the development site, which is essentially this parcel here. The access point itself, you can see here in the width, and visibility displays show you how much visibility is currently achieved at this site. There is no alteration to the walls of the surrounding walls at the access point now, and the access area will largely remain unaltered as it stands. This is the development site in a bit more detail. So it's a large property of a fairly unique proposal. This scheme proposes to have an inbuilt annex contained within the fabric of the building. So essentially, car parking would be shared. There'd be one front door, but essentially two staircases that then connected up to sort of two compartments of the two-storey property. These would be able to be, connected through. There is connectivity through from each living area, but it's described to us by the applicant as a multi-generational property designed to cater for both the applicant's younger family and elderly parents. Hence the unique layout and fairly substantial level of accommodation on offer. In terms of the elevation treatments of the proposal, it is a contemporary design. It's a flat roof, two-storey building with heavy glazing to the south and fairly modern to contemporary materials proposed. Obviously, to enable the siting of the building in this location, a number of trees will be required to be removed. However, trees along the boundary and other specimens in the garden area are intended to be retained. Now, this is a diagram really to show you the comparison of the scale of the building to some of the other properties in the area. So in terms of the consideration of this application, your officers have considered the principle of development here. Obviously, the centre of Eastleigh is a sustainable location and generally supported for housing development. Of note is the Eastleigh Neighbourhood Plan and Policy V1 of that plan. Officers have given this due consideration. For members who aren't familiar with that policy, it supports development within this location, which is defined as the priority uses for the village centre. And the policy describes that in the identified area, such development types, including community services, health centres, retail outlets, other businesses and services, cars and cycle parks, housing for older people, and other uses are to be supported. It's your officer's view that this application, in its approach towards a multi-generational offer, does comply with that policy. So is in general, generally supported in principle. As I said earlier, the application site falls within the conservation area. And there's two elements to this in this instance. There is the loss of the garage building towards the entrance to the site, which is here. And there's also the erection of the main house within the conservation area. So both elements fall within the Eastleigh conservation area. Due consideration has been given to the merits of the garage building here, but your officers feel that due to its setback from the main highway, lack of prominence within the public realm, and it's fairly well screened from the public realm on Main Street, that its loss is defined as less than substantial in this instance. Whereas the property, the residential property, again being further into the site and very well screened to the public areas by existing dwellings, would effectively have a neutral impact in this instance. In the weighing of the balance, then, the harm that would arise from the loss of that building is considered to be outweighed by the delivery of an appropriate residential property in a sustainable location, together with all of the economic and social benefits that would arise from that through its construction and through the population growth in this location. In terms of the driveway and access, there is sufficient width along this access for two cars to pass. So you'd have no issues with cars having to wait if they were met with another car exiting the site. You'll recall this is an existing long-standing access serving number 48. So whilst there is a slight intensification with it serving another property now, there is no objection from your highway consultants at Nottingham County Council. You'll see here that the applicant has demonstrated a required level of visibility onto Main Street. In terms of the trees that are to be lost have been reviewed by the council's tree officer. He considered that specimens wouldn't be suitable for retention due to their secluded nature. Has advised that a condition be included on any permission granted to safeguard the retention of the remaining trees on the site, as they serve very well as screening to the property. In terms of residential amenity, if I can just come back to the main plan here. This is the plan that shows it best. Here are your residential properties along Salisbury Avenue, those along Cromwell Drive, and these properties here on Starch Close. It's your officer's view that there is sufficient separation distance between these dwellings for the property not to have any significant detrimental harm in terms of overshadowing or overbearing nature. Likewise, in terms of visibility, the windows are mainly on this south elevation here, and the garden depth of 12 metres and the separation distance here of between 30 and 40 metres. Again, your officer's view is that there won't be any significant harm arising from that relationship. Chairman, in respect of this application, the recommendation is to approve both applications before you for the relevant demolition of the garage building, but also the erection of the dwelling house, subject to the conditions outlined in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. And we have 3 speakers on this item. The first is Paula Clark, who is the applicant. So Mrs. Clark is with us, or we've still got the presentation on the screen. Can we take the
just trying to get rid of it now. 1 second.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Right. So, right, Mrs. Clark, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
You have up to 5 minutes to talk to the committee. So as soon as you're ready, the clock will start ticking when you start talking. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to speak with you this evening. I wanted to explain my intent in applying for planning permission to build a family home in the middle of Eastleigh on the site owned by my friends, Christy and Stefano. I have lived in the area for well over a decade, starting in Westleigh in 2007 and moving to Eastleigh a decade later. We've made our family life here in Eastleigh and we love the village. A few years ago, our personal circumstances changed, and with becoming a single parent and my parents' health suffering simultaneously, Eastleigh has been a place that I've lived for probably the most turbulent time of my life. As such, it's a very special place for me and somewhere I want the opportunity to continue to live. But life has changed, and so what my family needs from a home has changed. As the provider for my children and sole carer for my elderly parents, I'm acutely aware that it's my responsibility alone to look after them all. And so I took the decision that I needed to find a way for my parents and my children to all live with me so that I could continually provide for their needs. Christy and Stefano bought the house at 48 Main Street in 2019. At the time, it was in a very tired state. And I know their plan is to use the money from the plot to put back into restoring the house and barns to their former glory, thus putting investment back into the street scene, which is very important to them also. As you may be aware, some years ago, there was an inquiry around application for 3 properties on the same site, which in my opinion, frankly, was an overdevelopment of the plot and not in keeping with the neighbourhood plan, and something that you've all referenced on other proposals this evening and 2 weeks ago. My intent was not to develop a plot for profit. Indeed, there will be no profit from this as a development. My intent is to develop the site because there is clear alignment between my family's needs and the intent of the neighbourhood plan for that particular location. After the year we've all had, I can't help but wonder how different all of this would have been for my family if we'd all been together and supporting each other. I note the comments around not separating into 2 dwellings, and I have no reservations about that whatsoever. I consider it to be a perfectly reasonable request and in keeping with the intent of a multi-generational house. I note the comments around maintaining the mature boundaries, which again aligns with my intent to maintain privacy in a central village setting for all concerned. I have no intention of living in a goldfish bowl. I've noted the comments around the demolition of the garage. However, this is a garage that is in such poor condition that it isn't even fit to house a car. It is not a listed building. It is in fact partly constructed with 1970s bricks. It has little impact on the street scene and is so far set back from the road that the erection of gates at the end of the drive will soon mean it can't be seen at all. The site is currently overgrown and degrading. It's not in use and it's too big for Christy and Stefano to maintain. It makes little sense to leave such a large plot in the centre of the village unused. And so the question surely has to be, how can we make best use of it whilst respecting the neighbourhood plan? All of this was taken into consideration when we came up with the design of the house. Christy and Stefano even invited neighbours along to understand their concerns and take them into account. What you're reviewing today is a result of all of that consultation with compromise made at every stage along the way. They listened when concerns were raised about a garage on the site and withdrew that addition. We all listened when neighbours were concerned about overlooking and pushed the house further north in the plot. We listened when it was suggested a dormer bungalow might be a better option than a full two-storey house because of roofline height, and so compromised on a flat roof house to allow the space required without it being too tall, with lower ridge height than a dormer bungalow. I'm sure you will accept that any change always brings uncertainty, and I've tried to listen and compromise at every turn. I genuinely believe we have found the best possible solution, a plot sympathetically developed that aligns with the neighbourhood plan. There are some compromises I can't make though. I can't compromise on the needs of my children and my parents. There simply are no houses on the market in Eastleigh suitable for multi-generational living. I don't want to have to leave Eastleigh in order to provide the care and accommodation my family needs. I'm here asking you not to make me and to respectfully request that you endorse the planner's recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark. That was very clear, and I know it's not easy talking to a bunch of strangers down the video line, down the YouTube. So thank you, but it's very clear, and we heard you clearly.
Thank you.
Our next speaker on this is from Eastleigh Parish Council, Councillor Eleanor Robinson. There you are, yes, and you're speaking, I think, in objection. So again, you have up to 5 minutes to talk to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm here to speak on behalf of Eastleigh Parish Council who are objecting to the application. I trust everyone's had the opportunity to read the objection which was submitted on the planning portal and covers several areas of concern. I'd like to start by focusing on policy V1 of the Eastleigh Neighbourhood Plan, which, as mentioned, regulates uses for the village centre, which is in a conservation area. Policy V1A states that the only types of housing development permitted in this location are those that particularly require this village centre location, including housing designed for older people and those with mobility problems. We note the applicant has stated that the home will be used for multi-generational housing, but the annex does not appear fit for this purpose. There is no bedroom on the ground floor, no bathroom on the ground floor, no lift, no wider doorways or turning points to allow easy use of wheelchairs or mobility aids, no additional space for a mobility vehicle requiring wider access. In short, the annex does not appear to be suitable housing for anybody with mobility issues, meaning that it is not justified under policy V1A. In addition, while we welcome the condition that it shall remain as a single dwelling, there is no condition currently proposed that will ensure that the dwelling or annex retain usage as housing for those who require close access to the village centre. Policy V1A of the Neighbourhood Plan specifically states that any development permitted in this location as housing designed for older people and those with mobility problems must have such uses for these homes preserved over time. If such use is being used as justification to create this new dwelling in the conservation area, then a condition for preserved usage should be applied. Policy V1B of the Eastleigh Neighbourhood Plan requires new buildings to use materials sensitive to the local context. The scale and proportion of the buildings should be sympathetic to their surroundings and complement the unique historic character of Eastleigh. The modern design contrasts significantly to the character of the village and especially to the character of the village centre, and so does not satisfy policy V1B. You'll note that many local residents have objected to the application on the portal for various reasons. Notably, neighbouring residents remain seriously concerned that the proposed dwelling will cause significant overlooking into their properties. The proposed plans show large areas of unobscured glazing, including across the full south side of the dwelling, both ground and first floor. In addition, there is a large first floor balcony, which seems unnecessary when both the main dwelling and annex are multi-storey. In conjunction, these design aspects lead to a strong feeling of being overlooked and seem overbearing to residents of Salisbury Avenue, Cromwell Drive and Starch Close. It has been suggested that the existing trees near the boundary will act as mitigation against overlooking. However, we have not yet seen a tree protection plan and so have no way of making a judgment on how well, if at all, this will ensure that overlooking will be reduced. In light of these points, along with our serious concerns about road and pedestrian safety, considering the location of the access point to the proposed dwelling, we strongly maintain our objection to the application.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well within 5 minutes, so thank you. And our final speaker on this item is one of the ward members, Councillor Way, please.
Good evening.
Hello.
There's been a lot of issues raised in connection with this planning application. It is a large building taking up most of the plot and reaching almost to the side boundaries. It has a huge amount of glass, and this, along with the loss of trees and the bulk of the building, will impact on the privacy and amenity of surrounding properties. The access will be along a driveway shared with number 48 and will mean a considerable increase in traffic entering and exiting the site. Highways have no objection to this in terms of visibility, but their report fails to mention that there's a major junction about 30 metres to the east, which you saw on a photograph earlier on. This is the busiest junction in Eastleigh and carries most of the traffic moving through the village. The lines of sight on the report's diagram are drawn from the centre of the driveway, but in order for a driver to have this level of visibility, the front of the vehicle will be across the footpath, even encroaching onto the road. To reach this point, the driver will have had to cross the footpath without being able to see if any pedestrians are nearby, particularly approaching from the right side along the garden wall. This is a major pedestrian route into the centre of the village and to the shops. It's also a route used regularly by school children attending the nearby primary school. Highways have stated that the vegetation on each side of the drive will need to be removed and a corresponding surface laid to enable 2 vehicles to pass on the driveway. The tree report shows the vegetation on the western side still intact, meaning that no consideration has been given to the trees and shrubs that will be lost here. On this diagram, the privet hedge on the eastern side is marked for removal. This was to enable the building of the garage in the front garden of number 48. This has been withdrawn, meaning that there is no need to remove this hedge. Removing the privet hedge on the eastern side and the trees and shrubs on the western side, followed by the laying of a new surface, will change this area from the appearance of a country driveway or lane to a roadway reminiscent of a modern new estate. This is in a conservation area and will have a huge impact on the street scene. Again, you've seen this on previous pictures. The conservation advisor considers the proposed addition of close-board timber fencing to be inappropriate. And the application just mentioned that the gateway at the end of the drive, and that doesn't seem to form part of the application. The tree report states that 13 trees will be removed. The trees are large and visible from much of the surrounding areas. This report assumes the retention of vegetation along the length of the driveway. However, this is contradicted elsewhere in the documents submitted. More trees are likely to be lost to those already earmarked for destruction. This report is out of date and does not reflect the revised plans that have removed the plan for the garage in the front garden, or that the proposed position of the house has moved northwards. It does not reflect the changes made in response to the highways comments to widen the drive. The removal of hedges and trees on each side of the drive are not mentioned in the landscape officer's report. Section 72 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 states that it is a requirement that any development should preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the area. The Conservation Advisor's report, dated the 7th of October 2020, recognises that the removal of the outbuildings will be somewhere between less than medium to medium harm. The harm arises from the removal of a characterful building that evokes least leaks past. Again, from the pictures, it can be seen that the buildings earmarked for demolition are clearly visible from the public realm. Any degree of harm is in conflict with the duty to preserve or enhance the appearance of conservation area. Development should be weighed against the benefit to the public at large and not just private benefit. The benefit here will be one family house. The Conservation Advisor's report predates the altered plans which were submitted in 2021. Opening up a wider view to the rear of the site by the removal of vegetation and widening the driveway will mean that the new building will quite clearly be in line of sight from the public realm. The ward members and Eastleigh Parish Council, along with many residents, object to this application, and I urge the Planning Committee to refuse permission for the application before you due to dangerous access, impact on neighbours, contravention of policy V1 of the Neighbourhood Plan, and harm to the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Way. So we've heard from our speakers there. First of all, from Mrs. Clark, who is the applicant, and she explained the reason for the application. She gave some personal reasons, family reasons, and explained how important the area is to her and her family. And she thinks that she and the design is making allowances for concerns that have been raised by neighbours and others. And she feels that there is no suitable property in Eastleigh that suits her requirements and family needs. Councillor, right. We then heard from Councillor Robinson from the Parish Council, who is against the application, in particular referring to contradictions or contraventions of the local neighbourhood plan over areas such as conservation area. She doesn't feel the annex doesn't fit in with the purpose of the application, and mentioned things like mobility issues and access. She feels that the material and scale of the building is out, excuse me, the material and scale of the building is out of character, and also referred to overlooking glazing, vast glazing which would overlook neighbouring properties, and also refer to trees and bushes, loss of, and hedges. And Councillor Way is a ward member. She made similar points, but she also says a very large building goes up to the side, almost up to the side boundaries, heavy on glazing and glass, will impact amenity of neighbours, and has worries about highways, access drive, and also referred to loss of trees and hedges, and also conservation concerns, considers it will be viewable from the public realm. And she wants to object on reasons of access, impact, neighbourhood plan, and character. So there we are. Those are the comments. Now, Councillor Purdy-Horan, he wants to say something now, or can I go to Mr. Cox first? I can't hear you.
No, by all means, go to the officer first.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Cox, and then I think Councillor Purdy-Horan will be the first to speak, isn't it?
Thank you, Chairman. Just share my screen now so I can talk around some of the issues. Firstly, in respect of privacy and amenity, officers have considered this and have considered it against our residential design guide also. Some of the comments there were about the proximity of the property to other residential properties and the degree of glazing within this elevation here. The rear garden distance here is 12 metres. That's 2 metres above the guidance within our residential design guide. The separation distance between these properties and these rear elevations of the property on Cromwell Drive is between 30 and 40 metres, again, in excess of what the residential design guide suggests is appropriate. Distances to the properties on Salisbury Avenue here, again, are comfortable at 23 metres, I believe that says. And they're getting a side elevation instead of windows necessarily looking over those properties. Again, oblique views here from number 46 looking towards this area here. The separation distances in your officer's view are very comfortable and are akin to what is regularly considered acceptable. In terms of the loss of the trees, the tree officer has reviewed the plans and being in the conservation area, of course, the removal of any trees that doesn't benefit from planning permission would require an additional consent. So with the tree officer having reviewed the plans which have assessed the trees which are proposed to be removed, he is content that none of those trees are suitable for protection with a tree preservation order in this instance. So to respond to that point, essentially what is before you is suggested to be what is to be approved to be removed. And any further removal of trees which isn't shown on these plans would require a further notification to the council, where we would be able to get a second assessment of those trees. In terms of impact on the street scene, Chairman, you can see the length of the drive here. I'm afraid officers don't share the view that it will be prominent within Main Street. This is oblique views at best of the existing garage building, and how narrow this land is and how far into the site it is, again screened by these properties. I'm afraid officers do not share that view also. In terms of the heritage impacts, there is a section in the report which deals with this, and correctly referenced was the balance there that's required with the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, your heritage officer, the conservation officer for the council, has identified that the erection of the building will have a neutral impact. So that's a neutral level of harm, and the demolition of the garage building will have a less than substantial harm, will arise from less than substantial harm. Correctly, we have to weigh the benefits of the development against that harm. And as I said in my presentation, the building itself, whilst is a building which is of origin and in keeping with the period properties in the area, it isn't in the best condition. It's not readily visible along Main Street. I think there was a photograph that shows its glimpse along. I'll zoom to it here. This is the building we're referring to, and it's still very well screened by the vegetation in and around the area, some of which is on this land here. So the officer's view that whilst it's regrettable to lose any period building within a conservation area, this particular garage outbuilding isn't a fantastic example, and the benefits of delivering housing delivery in a sustainable location such as this, in our view, are significant enough to outweigh that loss. And that overall, the development before you has a neutral impact and adequately preserves the special character and appearance of the conservation area. Turning to the matter of the neighbourhood plan policy V1, I think it's probably appropriate if I read the exact wording of what this says just to refresh members' memories. So policy V1A states that in the area defined as the East Leek Village Centre, which this site falls within, the only types of new development permitted will be those that particularly require this village central location. Such development types include community services, health services, retail outlets, other businesses and servicing requiring a shop front, car and bicycle parks, housing for older people, those with mobility problems and situations where living over shop is appropriate. Social and leisure space is also included. Officers share the view of the applicant in this instance that the property being put forward is of a multi-generational offer and will have that ability to satisfy that criteria of the policy. The policy doesn't require housing for older people with motility problems. Those are two separate allowances, if you like. It's housing for older people and then those with mobility problems. So, points noted about accommodation not being found on the ground floor. However, in our view is that looking at the policy as plainly read, that this does offer housing for older people, and therefore is generally acceptable. Another, I suppose, consideration there is, the land space that this property has, is arguably an inefficient use of land, and currently, occupied, requires a lot of maintenance, and is arguably an anomaly in the current framework when a lot of the other land parcels have been developed for, similar types of housing, and therefore would be in keeping with those two. I think that's everything covered by the objector and Councillor Labour. Do remind me if you want me to come back on anything there, Chairman.
Indeed, yes, and I'm sure other points will come up in a few moments. So thank you for that response. We have 3 speakers already on this, and indeed the first was Councillor Purdue-Horan, followed by Councillor Mason and then Councillor Major. So Councillor Purdue-Horan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the officers for an excellent report, which went into a lot of detail, and indeed an excellent presentation by the officer, which has helped me to understand some of the questions I had. And I wish to thank those that spoke at the beginning of this item. However, my thoughts are that this is an acceptable application, and I'd like to move, Mr. Chairman, that the recommendations to approve planning permission and demolition are accepted, along with the conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Purdue-Horan. That was very swift. I will allow other members to come in, but at this stage, do you have a seconder for that, please? Does anyone, Councillor Birdie's hand's just gone up, I think, on that. So, oh, sorry. Sorry, yes.
Because it's 2 separate applications, could we deal with the full application first and then the relevant demolition second? So if we can have 1 motion per application, please.
Right. Yes. So, Councillor Purdue-Horan, did you get that? Do you want to just clarify and confirm that we've got 2, in effect, 2 applications on this? We will have to decide each one separately.
So I'm happy to propose both, and for both to be taken separately. Okay.
Thank you. Is that helpful, Mrs. Sells?
If we move the full motion first, the full application first.
Right. So we've got a full application proposed or moved by Councillor Purdue-Horan. I'm looking for a seconder for that. I think I saw Councillor Verdi's hand go up. Am I correct in that, Councillor Verdi?
Thank you.
Yes. So we got that, and now we have the second part of the application. And Councillor Purdue-Horan, I think you're just about to formally move that, aren't you?
We need to deal with the motion on the table first.
Oh, right.
This motion. So.
Yes, but I've got other speakers who want to come in. So should I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
let's take the speakers first.
Yes, I want to hold on before we get anywhere near a decision yet. We've got to hear from the other speakers. So hold that thought. And my next speaker is Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to either propose or second it, but it's already been done. So that's okay. I would just say that I find the building that is to be pulled down, I find it has no aesthetic beauty, I'm afraid. And I think that it is really quite reasonable, and it will allow this application to go ahead. And for the actual main application, I find that there are plenty of conditions. There's 19, I believe, conditions on it, as well as notes to the applicant. So I am just saying that, yes, I agree with Councillor Purdue-Horan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Mason. That's very helpful. Councillor Major, I think, was next on the list here. Yes, Councillor Major.
Yep. I'm just going to echo other people's comments, and a lot of it was covered by Mr. Cox in his summary of that. I think this has demonstrated that it's for older people, not older people with disabilities, because that's not the stipulation required. I've struggled to see how it would impact on the street scene, particularly if you do look along Main Street. It's not exactly a picturesque street scene along the full length of it, given there are very varied types of housing along that stretch anyway, and you wouldn't be able to see this house at all. So I have absolutely no issues with that, with the sort of impact on the conservation area. And I think the other point that was raised that wasn't referred to by Mr. Cox specifically was around access. Now, I'm not quite sure how suddenly an extra dwelling is going to result in multiple cars up and down a small drive. I just can't believe that's going to be the case when you have a single family home. So equally, I don't have any challenges. There is an existing access point at that point in the road as it stands, and so I don't think this is going to cause any more dramas on that front. So I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Birdie, I know I took you earlier on, but did you want to come? Your hand's still up. Would you like to? Are you coming in on any other comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly. I mean, I think echoing a lot of the points that have been made, and hence my seconding this motion. I think the application is proposing a new dwelling. You know, it's within an existing built-up part of the village, and I think some of the points made by the objectors, I think our officers have put forward very strong arguments in terms of the multi-generational dwelling that is being proposed, and again in agreement with the conservation area issues around the loss of the garage. I'm not convinced at all that is less than substantial harm, so I'm not convinced that is a reason for us to refuse. And finally, the issue of the property, neighbouring properties and overbearing and so on. I think the significant distances, again, in my view, are very acceptable. So I think I'm very happy to second the motion proposed by Councillor Purdue-Horan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Birdie. Councillor Clark, your hand is up, and then Councillor Goldberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got three questions. Firstly, Mr. Cox talked about, I didn't write the whole comment down accurately, but he referred to the level of visibility onto Main Street will be addressed. Well, I'm assuming that the brick wall, on the frontage, is something that forms part of the conservation area. So I'm assuming that he's not suggesting that the brick wall be demolished to create that visibility he was talking about. And secondly, there are two questions that relate to the conservation area. And some people will know that a debate took place not very long ago regarding conservation areas and its impact on conservation areas. I can't find the actual paragraph at the moment, but I remember reading from the conservation officer concerns about the application, and also there was a comment made that as the proposal will not be seen from the public realm, then it's not going to have an impact on the conservation area. So that tells me that provided you hide things and screen things, then you can build whatever you like in a conservation area, because it quite clearly stated that because it won't be seen from the public realm, it has no effect on the conservation area. And tied in with that, perhaps could I just have confirmation, is Cromwell Drive within the conservation area? Because if Mr. Cox could indulge me and just bring up the location plan again. And we have discussed in conservation areas before the light emanating from glass buildings, contemporary glass buildings. So what I'm concerned about is the impact on at night time. If all the lights are on in this contemporary house, it will form a very great beacon, and hedges and trees have a habit of dying off occasionally and disappearing. So I am interested to know what is the impact on all the lights being on in this glass house on probably properties 8, 10, 12, 14 and 16 Cromwell Drive, because clearly, I mean, light travels a lot further than the 30 to 40 metres that Mr. Cox was talking about. So I need some comfort as regards the impact on the conservation area, because I think that the comments that have been made in the report don't bode well with the protection and the preservation of the conservation area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. The conservation officers is basically around about paragraph 21, if you're looking in your report. Right, well, before we get answers to those questions, I've got Councillor Goland, please.
Hi, so I've got two comments. One is, I think it's a bit irrelevant really what the local plan has to say about old people's properties, because, you know, strictly this isn't really an old people's property. It may be a property that could be used by old people, but it's not designed to be suitable for old people. And unless there was another family coming into the area who happened to need the same living arrangements, it could just as easily be rented out to lodgers. I think also the balconies overlooking the back gardens in the neighbouring street are unfortunate, to say the least. And the sort of, you know, design in that area is probably okay, but I think it is unfortunate that that amount of light and that amount of balcony is going to be there when it's unnecessary, as far as I can see. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Cox, the questions about the conservation and the lights, impact of lighting, and the balcony. No pun intended. But any views and comments on that, please?
Thanks, Chairman. Firstly, the brick wall at the front of the property is to be retained. Just to confirm to Councillor Clark there. In terms of the conservation area and its impact when you're losing buildings, Councillor Clark is absolutely right. It's not just the fact that it's not heavily visible, but that does weigh fairly heavily in the balance. What is being considered there is the merits of the building, its architectural features, its size, its relationship to other period buildings within the area, and as well how prominent and an important feature it fits within a conservation area. And in our view, in this instance, it's a domestic outbuilding that has very limited visibility. It's not exactly prominent. So Councillor Clark is correct that it doesn't solely fall on that matter, but taking all of these matters in the round, the judgment is that its loss would result in a less than substantial harm to the overall character and appearance of the entire conservation area. And therefore, as I've said previously, officers' view is that the delivery of an appropriate dwelling in a very sustainable location outweighs that harm that arises from that loss. But Councillor Clark is correct that it's not just about visibility in this instance. In terms of Cromwell Drive, I'm not certain whether Cromwell Drive is within the conservation area. Andrew, do you know whether that road is or isn't?
Yes, I can answer that one for you in a moment.
Okay, and in terms of light spill from the residential property, if I can move over to, I mean, the only thing really I can say on that is that yes, there is a large amount of glazing. It's unlikely that all lights will be on at any one time, and when you have separation distances of 30 or 40 metres, officers do believe that that is a fairly significant mitigating factor. Throw that in with the fairly heavy vegetation that features on these boundaries. We're not convinced that there will be a significant impact upon the amenities of those neighbouring properties. That's not to say that they won't be able to see lights in the distance, but you know, when you're looking at the level of harm that would arise from that, officers aren't convinced that that would be the case to warrant refusal of the application. In terms of comments made by Councillor Gowland, the property would not be able to be rented out to lodgers. There is a condition imposed on the recommendation before you. The internal annex accommodation remains entirely connected to the main property and not rented out as separate planning units. And in terms of the balconies, I think we've covered that in my original presentation about the impact upon the amenity of the surrounding properties.
Chairman, if I can chip in as well. While that plan is on the screen at the moment, you can see at the top, the visibility display is actually the area in the pink, and that indicates to me that that's as useful. That indicates to me that the visibility display doesn't interfere with front boundary wall or virtually the whole of that vegetation and natural growth along the front boundary. Nick, could you stop sharing for a moment, please? So just to pick up on one point, Chairman, because it's a very important point that we need to consider. Just Councillor Verdi, when he was talking about the loss of the garage, acknowledged that there would be less than substantial harm and therefore that was acceptable. Just to reiterate, Chairman, because as I say, it is a very important point we need to acknowledge, any harm in a conservation area has to be given substantial weight. If there is harm, that then has to be balanced with the public benefits. One of the speakers mentioned that this is a private house and doesn't provide any public benefits. However, Chairman, the guidance on this issue is that public benefits flow from the development and have to satisfy either the economic, social or environmental requirements. One of the social requirements is ensuring the provision of housing and a mix of housing, and clearly as a multi-generational housing, we are satisfied that this ticks a social benefit, a public benefit. The other point, Chairman, just to confirm for Councillor Clark's query, I think it's called Cromwell at the rear, is not in the conservation area. Effectively, the southern boundary of this site is the boundary of the conservation area. In terms of the harm of light spillage, that wouldn't be on the conservation area in this instance from Cromwell Drive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. And yes, the condition number 17 refers to the residential annex contained will not be occupied any time other than for residential purposes, and it also refers shall not be sublet or sold separately. So that's the relevant condition there. Councillor Golan, your hand is still up. Did you want to come back, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, there's no point getting into the philosophy of it, but I'd like to one day have explained to me the legal level of that condition. You know, we've heard so many times about matters that are in. Sorry, I've lost my ability to speak. Matters that are in the
public.
Well, anyhow, lots of these matters, there's nothing we can do about it.
No,
I mean, they come to planning. So, like, what's the point of writing it down somehow?
Yes, but what I try and reassure you is if the day ever came when this family or whoever might want to try a different living arrangement, or because if permission is given tonight, this condition is in there. No matter how many years away we might be talking, that whoever is involved there would have to come back for permission. As a change of use in effect. So so there is some protection there. Now that could happen, I don't know, who knows? It could happen in 6 months, it could happen in 6 years, 60, who knows? But the fact that you've got conditions there, they are there until and if they change. So I hope that gives some reassurance.
Well, anyhow, moving on, the balcony, could somebody comment about the visibility from the balcony of the neighbouring gardens, please?
Oh yeah, the visibility, the balcony, Mr. Cox. Yes, I forgot that. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. I mean, the balcony is no closer to the boundary than the windows would be, and as I expressed in my presentation, the separation distance of 12 metres from the back of the property to the boundary means that the immediate outlook would be overlooking their own garden area. You'd then have a boundary feature, a fence with what we've discussed already, fairly substantial screening, and then further separation distance to the windows. So it's your officer's view that this is compliant with our residential design guide, even from views from that balcony in the same way as if they were views from that window. I don't have much more to add to that, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Councillor Clark. Yes, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm afraid I wasn't comforted by Mr. Cox's comment that it's unlikely that all the lights will be on. Well, they could be all on, but anyway, that is slightly irrelevant. The fact is that within glass house, we have seen in other conservation areas, the glass houses with the lights on creates a hell of a light pollution, whether it's all the lights or some of the lights. So I was looking for in the conditions, and I don't know if condition 18 about a tree protection plan could be expanded, because I think I would only be happy if there was a condition that ensured that there was screening on the southern boundary to protect those Cromwell Drive properties from light pollution, because there is no doubt if the lights are on in that glass house, they will shine straight into the rear of those Cromwell Drive properties, creating, to me, what I would consider quite a significant nuisance to those properties. So how is that screening going to be achieved and ensured that it's always there to prevent light pollution? Thank you.
Right. Is there an answer to that?
Yes, Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, there is. Firstly, the trees on the southern boundary that are to remain and that aren't shown to be removed, as they fall within the conservation area, have an element of protection by themselves. So effectively, anybody wishing to remove those or carry out works to those would need to notify us first in the future, and we would have an opportunity to protect them if we saw fit at that time. And in addition to that, condition 4 of the recommendation here requires a submission of both a hard and soft landscaping scheme to be submitted and agreed with by the council. So that opens that opportunity that Councillor Clark was referring to for us to secure additional screening on that southern boundary if we saw fit.
Councillor Clark.
Fine, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That was succinct. That's answered your question then. Okay, so we've had quite a discussion on this. We've had the recommendation moved and seconded by Councillor. Well, sorry, both the recommendations moved and seconded by Councillor Purdue and Councillor Mason. I don't think anyone else has wanted to come back on this. I assume not. So I think we go to a decision, please, Mrs. Sells.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is to approve as per officer's recommendation for the full permission to start with. Thank you. Councillor Butler.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Goland.
4.
Councillor Healy.
4.
Councillor Major.
4.
Councillor Mason.
4.
Councillor Murray.
4.
Councillor Purdue-Horan.
4.
Councillor Stockwood.
4.
And Councillor Verdi.
4.
Thank you. So that's 10-4, so that motion carries. So if we now have someone to move the relevant demolition, we can vote on that.
So Councillor Purdue-Horan. I saw Councillor Major's hand go up there. But shall we stay with Councillor Purdue-Horan? Are you happy to move this recommendation? Yes. And seconder, just to confirm, who would like to second that? Maybe Councillor Major? Yes, Councillor Major will second that.
Thank you all. So running through again, Councillor Butler.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Goland.
4.
Councillor Healy.
4.
Councillor Major.
4.
Councillor Mason.
4.
Councillor Murray.
4.
Councillor Purdue-Horan.
4.
Councillor Stockwood.
4.
And Councillor Verdi.
4.
Thank you. Oh, that's 10-4, so that motion carries also.
Thank you. It's unanimous, isn't it? So thank you, colleagues, and also our guests for your contributions on this. I think we had a good discussion and debate on it, but permission is granted. So thank you. It's 8:35. We've got one more application to go. Would anyone mind if we had a 5-minute break, or would anyone like to have a 5-minute break just to get a glass of water and stretch legs, etc.? So it's 8:35 now. Let's try and be back for 8:40. Okay, thank you. Right, are we all back? Is Councillor Birdie with us? Yes, yeah, good. So thank you for that. So you, sometimes after 2 hours sitting in one position and looking at a screen, you do need to have a little eye break and leg stretch. So there we are. Just the slight irony of the last application we had, of course, is that you may have noticed I'm working from the arena at the moment, and as is Mr. Pegram in another side of the building. And we both said to each other, the slight irony is here we were talking about the light, or worries about the light coming out of windows of that other application. And here we are in the arena and all the lights are on blazing. And then just as we said that, they all started to go dim. Anyway, I'm digressing. Well, we've got one more fire.
I pressed the right buttons then, Chairman.
Yeah, yes, all the way from where you are.
But it's not great. It's not great for the wildlife, so it's good to turn them off.
Indeed, yes, and even the LED ones. Right. Anyway, we must move on, and we've got one more application tonight, and this is 27 High Street, Ruddington. And Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. You should hopefully be able to see the screen. So the application before you this evening seeks alterations and conversion of the building to provide 5 residential units of accommodation, retaining a commercial element on the corner of the property, which I'll point out in a moment. So this is the application site in Ruddington. It is within the conservation area. You have the High Street here and Kirk Lane running through here. And at the back here, you may recall Kempston Court, where we had an application a little while ago for some housing on the site at the end there. This is the property in question. So you can see it's got commercial presence on the corner, which would be retained. The first floor also is a commercial element, which again would be retained. Buildings have been used for commercial purposes previously, but you'll see from the report, Chairman, because of the type and the layout of the site, not considered that these buildings are suitable for modern use now. That's just looking again from High Street across at the site, moving along, and then the Conservative Club is the neighbouring property here. That's now standing in Kirk Lane, looking across at the property. So again, the commercial property you saw on the corner, and we now start to see the open courtyard area of that building. The proposal does include demolition of some elements of the building, including the flat-roofed extensions. And this building, this property would be retained and converted. Chairman, you'll note from the report, and you'll see from the plans in the moment, that part of the proposal does include the removal of the lower section of this wall to provide undercroft car parking, and I'll show that on the plans in just a moment. That's looking back again at the property on the corner, and then just showing you the modern flat-roofed extensions that are to be demolished. That's now looking from Kempston Court, so it's looking through the access and the courtyard behind the Conservative Club. That's the neighbouring property, or the rear of the neighbouring property on Kirk Lane. So you're now looking at the back of that coach house type building with a flat-roofed extension to the rear. Again, looking across up at that building next door on Kirk Lane. And then looking back effectively towards the front of the building. So the roofs you can see are those elements of the building that front High Street. This is the coach house that fronts Kirk Lane. And these are obviously some modern extensions. That's again looking down at the rear of the Conservative Club, which also wraps around the corner here. And the application property is on the right. So, application property, Chairman, as you saw in those photographs, is the area there with the Conservative Club next door, Kempston Court to the rear. These are the effectively the plans of the existing property, so I won't dwell on those because you have seen the photographs. That one provides details of the elements of the building to be demolished. And then this is, again, looking from Kempston Court with the Conservative buildings in the foreground, application site to the rear. I skip, Chairman, probably to this one, which is quite helpful in explaining what's going on here. So this part of the building would be demolished. And then this part of the building is that's the proposed extension or addition, the two-storey extension to the rear of the properties at Front High Street and the property fronting Kirk Lane. So that's, again, looking from Kirk Lane, the proposal involves some alterations to the fenestration of the building on this side, maintaining some of the openings, but with obviously closing some of those openings in a sympathetic way. That's looking into the courtyard area. So that element there is set back from the road. And you'll see that here, I'll show you another picture in a moment, is an external staircase up to one of the units that will be created. This is looking from Kempston Court again. It's quite useful because effectively it provides you with a, obviously that's looking without the Conservative Club in place on the lower screen, but from Kempston Court with the Conservative Club in place, there's very little impact of the new works on Kempston Court when viewed from that side. So the proposal includes the conversion of this area here into one unit. You will see that there are 4 parking spaces proposed, cycle parking and bin store. These 3 parking spaces are provided in the undercroft created by the removal of that section of the wall on the coach house building. And this parking space again is an undercroft under the new extension. You'll see that the properties do have little courtyard gardens. So this is the property on the ground floor, has a courtyard garden there. The 2 properties here are mews style dwellings and again have a little courtyard garden there. If we move up to the first floor, you come up the new external staircase into this property here, there, and then there's another property created in there, a flat with a first floor courtyard garden, and then the bedroom accommodation to the mews dwellings at first floor, overlooking the void of the courtyard gardens. Again, that's the layout of those mews properties. You can see they've got a little lean-to there, windows at first floor, courtyard at ground floor with windows looking out onto those courtyards. This is just a section through to show you that staircase that would be constructed up to that first floor flat. And the next one shows you effectively the undercroft parking arrangement. Just to give some life to the 2D plans, the applicants did submit this image, which provides hopefully a bit more, or brings it to life a bit more, showing the extension in the position there, the buildings converted and the changes to the fenestration. Chairman, clearly Ruddington is an area for growth in our local plan. The site is in the middle of the village. It's considered to be a highly sustainable location. So the principle of converting these buildings to residential accommodation is considered to be acceptable. I mentioned about the loss of the commercial premises, and there was a report that was submitted that sought to demonstrate that the buildings were not really suitable for modern purposes, and therefore that the market for those buildings was limited, and there was not considered to be an objection on the grounds of loss of the employment uses. We are again, Chairman, within the conservation area, so I'll to remind members that you have a duty under Section 72 of the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act to have regard to the desirability for preserving and enhancing the character and appearance of the area. There is some concern from your conservation officer about the flat roofs of the extensions. However, Chairman, if I come back to this image, you can see that to a certain extent they have limited impact on the wider area, and they do replace a range of existing flat roofed extensions, and therefore your officers didn't consider that to be an unacceptable arrangement. Again, Chairman, this does deliver wider public benefits by providing housing in a sustainable location which satisfies the social elements of the strands of sustainable development, and does provide some parking, clearly not one for every unit. There are 4 parking spaces for the five flats / mews dwellings. But we are in a highly sustainable location, and therefore it's considered that that level of parking is appropriate. Chairman, this is considered to be an acceptable reuse of this building, and the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we don't have any speakers on this item, so we can go straight into discussion. So, Councillor Purdue-Horan, please. Oh, and then, sorry, yes, and then Councillor Thomas.
Just a question for clarification on a legal matter, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't aware, and I'm not familiar with the Ruddington Conservative Club, but I have no connection with it. I am aware that Conservative clubs are separate entities, but have a legal connection with the Conservative Party, which I won't try to explain this evening. My question is really that I'm not a member of Ruddington Conservative Club, but because of that sort of connection upstairs somewhere, is it an obligation for myself as a member of the Conservative Party to declare any kind of interest?
Well, I'm sure Mrs. Sells will confirm, but my thought would be no, but it's entirely up to an individual if you think you've got an interest in anything. Just the fact it's the name a Conservative club doesn't necessarily mean it is part of a main part of the party. And of course, as ever, planning decisions are not made on political basis. But so my personal thought is it has no connection whatsoever, but I'm sure Mrs. Sells might just help if I clarify that, please.
No, I agree with your approach, Chair. It's each councillor's personal opinion and whether they consider there is an interest. But if you have no particular affiliation with the club directly, the only affiliation is as you say, some link somewhere up the chain. You've got no links directly to that Ruddington one then. But I wouldn't have thought you do have an interest. But as I say, each councillor to determine for themselves.
Okay,
thank you.
Is that helpful, Councillor Purdue-Horan?
Very helpful, thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do note that the Conservation Officer objected to this application. And as far as I can see, the objection is, and it echoes how I feel about this application, isn't to the facade on the sort of building to, is it Kirk Lane, and the one on the other side. It's the aspect of the courtyard. And the flat-roofed unsightly buildings are being demolished and being replaced by flat-roofed buildings. Which the Conservation Officer has pointed out is not an enhancement and not in keeping with the character of the area. And the section 72 of the, is it the listing buildings and something Act, Mr. Pegram, does talk about enhancement and betterment, as does Policy 10 of Local Plan Part 1. So I think this proposal contravenes Policy 10 of Local Plan Part 1, Parts A and C. Development is required to make a positive contribution. It's not meant to just replace things that are unsympathetic with other things that are unsympathetic. So I think the central flat is the issue, really, as far as I'm concerned, and that arrangement does have a negative impact on the street scene. There's also the harm to a heritage building, in that they're taking the side wall out to create car parking spaces. And I think the Conservation Officer is calling this facadism, which is a practice of just leaving the front of a building and taking the backs out. My other concern is the amenity of the neighbours, which is Policy 1 of Local Plan Part 2. There seems to be overlooking of the rear garden and loss of light, particularly to the neighbouring property on Kirk Lane. And I'm very concerned about the impact of the noise from the first floor outdoor seating area, and indeed through the Juliet windows and so on, and the impacts the other way as well of noise from the mews type cottages, gardens, as described by Mr. Pegram, on the residents in the central flat. There's insufficient amenity space for the new residents. Yeah, so on that basis, I would move that we refuse the application. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. So you're moving a recommendation for refuse for basically on grounds of conservation concerns, the flat roof issues, overbearing, light, worried about noise and lack of amenity space. I think I got those points. We're very early in the debate, of course, but is there a seconder at this stage for that? Councillor Healy, you've got your hand up. Is that to speak or is it to get involved with this recommendation?
To speak, Chair.
Okay, just one moment. I'll come back to you in a sec. Mr. Pegram, you want to just come in on there?
Chairman, yeah, just to re-emphasise the statutory duty you have under section 72. It is to give regard to the desirability for preserving or enhancing. You don't have to demonstrate that a scheme enhances or provides betterments to the conservation area. And obviously, yes, we have acknowledged, Chairman, that there is some harm arising from this scheme, but in our opinion, that harm is balanced and outweighed by the provision of the housing in a highly sustainable location. Yes, the loss of the side wall of the coach house is somewhat regrettable, but again, we balance that with the fact that that was providing some car parking, which we are aware is clearly an emotive issue, as we've discussed this evening. If I can just share my screen with you and try and address some of the concerns perhaps about the impact on the neighbouring property. This is the first floor plan. And you can see that the two-storey elements of the coach house effectively runs through roughly in line with the rear of that neighbouring property. So in terms of overbearing impacts, these elements at ground floor are single-storey. And if we go back to the photographs, just to remind members, you can see that it wouldn't have an overbearing impact on the garden, in my view, which is this area down through here. If we then go back to the layout plan, the only first floor courtyard is this one here, which is effectively enclosed there, and therefore use of that, in my opinion, Chairman, wouldn't have an adverse impact on the nearest residential property. The neighbouring property is obviously the club that we've referred to. Yes, Chairman, the garden areas are relatively small. However, these are flats / mew style dwellings in a highly sustainable location, and our guidance in the residential design guide does acknowledge that whilst it's desirable to provide gardens for flats, it's not essential. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. That's very helpful. Right, Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the starting point with this is clearly this was a building that was used commercially, but as Mr. Pegram has already outlined, it's now felt that the age of the buildings are not conducive to modern working requirements. So clearly, it's a substantial space. Yes, it's on the corner of a busy high street in Kirk Lane, but nevertheless, there's no increase in footprint as I see it. 5 residential units would be provided in the middle of a busy town centre, which clearly has got to be a plus. The courtyard stays, serving 2 purposes, really providing parking, and there's also an undercroft in there. But more importantly, in view of the location, the space, there's a turning space in within the building itself, where cars can drive in and they can actually drive out, and clearly that's got to be a plus. Personally, I think it's a very attractive proposal, to be quite honest. It's using a very, very important space, and I have no hesitation in supporting the proposal.
Right. Okay, thank you. So are you in effect moving the recommendation as per the report?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay. I mean, yes. We need to go
if there's
to
a seconder for Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I was going to come on to that. So before we get to this one, we had Councillor Thomas's moving a refusal for the reasons we've discussed. Is there a second for Councillor Thomas's proposal, please? Oh, I sense not. Am I correct? I don't think there is. So, right, okay. So I think that answers that question. So we now come to, oh, this is Councillor Stockwood.
Sorry.
Come to Councillor Healy in a moment.
Yes, I was going to second Councillor Healy's.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Well, hold that thought. So we've had unless anyone else wishes to speak, we've got the recommendation as per the report moved by Councillor Healy, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Stockwood, and now Councillor Clark wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking for some assurances because no doubt, I mean, it does have an heritage aspect to this, and I hear what has been said about the lack of takers, if you like, for the commercial. It's all very well, it's very easy to say, oh, well, it's not suitable anymore, but if you look at paragraph 51 on page 48, which refers to this issue, it's talking about it's been advertised since February 2020. Well, that was at the very beginning of the COVID crisis. So I think it's unfair to say that, oh, well, yes, because during the whole of the COVID crisis, there haven't been any inquiries. I'm not entirely surprised, to be honest, because people have been working from home. And what is happening now is that companies are wanting to downsize physically as regards premises, maybe not downsize in terms of personnel, but I think there will be a trend that there'll be a lot more people working from home, but companies still need a base, but not necessarily an office for 100 odd people. They might just need an office for 2 or 3 or 5 people. So I'm not utterly convinced that every effort has been made, because what does concern me a little bit is that if these were residential dwellings, then I hope they aren't going to start complaining about, high street activities, etc. But I think really that's my main concern, is I want a bit more detail as to what is actually meant by there hasn't been any demand and there is little demand, etc. That's not no demand, because we just don't know. The market has not been tested until we are back to whatever normal working is going to be. And it might seem a minor detail, but a completely different detail. I don't know if Mr. Pegram could bring us up the street scene of Kirk Lane. I don't mind if it's either the proposal or the current or the existing. What I'm getting to is, from the heritage aspect, there's a little timber gantry still in the roof space, and I would like to see that it's in that little dormer window. I don't know if you've got the actual photograph of the current Kirk Lane, Mr. Pegram. Whoop, there.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. Now, to me, that's an important heritage feature, and I would like to see a condition to ensure that that is retained, so that to me that's an important heritage feature of the conservation area. because that shows and demonstrates the original use of that commercial building, when that gantry would have been used to hoist up sacks from the horse and cart or whatever into the upper warehouse, the upper storage. So to me, that's a nice feature, and I want to see that retained. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Councillor Clark. Would it help if we saw the 3D, or whatever we call them, illustration designs, to see if that would be a practical thing to do, if the archway is still there?
I'd just like to make the comment that Councillor Clark is very eagle-eyed this evening. That's two very minor, well, small-scale details on the plans that he's picked up on.
Yes.
It does look like, Chairman, there does appear to be something in that position.
There's something there, isn't there?
I'm just checking on the conservation area.
It doesn't look to me like that's still a gantry. That just looks like
something's there, but
a block of something. It's not the gantry.
Right. It is, Chairman. These are identified as key unlisted buildings in the conservation area. I take on board what Councillor Clark is saying, and it does hark back to the sort of historic use of the building. If clearly, if the councillor who moved the application also wishes to see that or agree with that element being retained in the seconder, I wouldn't have concerns about a condition that requires a scheme to demonstrate how that's going to be retained.
So, Councillor Healy, yes, what would you?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pegram. I'd be more than happy to see that. I mean, yes, I hadn't noticed that, and well done, Councillor Clark, for spotting it. Clearly, it is relevant, very significant, and I think it should be conditional on the proposal.
Yes, thank you. And Councillor Stockwood as seconder, are you happy with that?
Yes, I am happy with that.
Okay, thank you. So we've got that.
Chairman, it's just the issue about the. I just need the final convincing about the.
The sustainability, the business, the commercial demand. Yes, can we explain that a bit more? How we come to that conclusion?
Chairman, yes, it is dealt with in the report. It's paragraphs 49, 50, 51. I think there is some acknowledgement that the marketing obviously coincided with COVID, which has, as they put it, exacerbated the sort of uncertainty of the market for this type of building. Clearly, Chairman, the view we took that report was produced by commercial property agents. We have no reason necessarily to doubt or question that. You may recall we had a similar situation with the buildings in Kempston Court, which is just to the rear of this site. And again, the nature of the buildings was such that they weren't considered to be of great demand. The other issue is that the locational issues of this site, again, are considered to limit the uses for commercial purposes. A matter for members to consider, Chairman.
Yeah. So does that help, Councillor Clark? Let's clarify things a little bit.
Yes, I just wish that there was an absolute finite, absolute assurance, because people can always produce a report to say, oh, there have been no takers or no interest, but who can confirm or deny that evidence? But
and again, that's for perhaps interpretation of the committee, and as Mr. Pegram has suggested.
Right.
Now, Councillor Goland, I think you've got your hand up, haven't you?
Just picking up on that point, I mean, I think it's really hard to say. I've been talking a lot with people at work this week and other people, how we don't know how we will be returning to work. I imagine small hubs like this for working might well be very popular, but leaving that aside, can I ask a particular question about the overlooking? Oh, just one thing. I think the beam is in the proposed elevation for Kirk Lane. Can I ask about the overlooking on number 2 Kirk Lane? Can you just clarify, because I can't really work it out from the plans, and I had some trouble downloading them earlier on. So the neighbours and
we'll get the plans up again. So it's the Kirk Lane.
So yes, Chairman, there is you've got the roof of the coach house. You've got a flat roof 2-story extension, which, as you saw from one of the other plans, doesn't project beyond the rear wall of number 2. You do have the closest feature there is a Juliet balcony. So it's not a balcony you can step out onto. There is effectively a balustrade in front of the windows that effectively prevent you stepping out. And dare I say, Chairman, it's probably, if I go back to the photographs and we look at the back of these properties, it's not an uncommon relationship you've got. That window that would be in sort of this location would serve bedroom accommodation, and that almost replicates what probably in the back of these houses already.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Thomas, is your hand up again? Yeah, so Councillor Thomas, please.
Yes, on the overlooking of the neighbouring property on Kirk Lane, I think that the residents have expressed concern that there's a problem, which is, I think that is pertinent, basically. But I was going to provide some reassurance to Councillor Clark on the business usage, which I too would regret the loss of a business opportunity, which is in the centre of, the business area, the retail area. But the way I understand it is that the way legislation is going at the moment, it's to assist such properties being converted towards residential use. So it would be kind of fighting against that tide to refuse an application on that basis was my feeling when I thought about that issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do hear a lot, don't we, about town centre regeneration and converting office buildings and retail units, which sadly may not have a future as they are at the moment, into residential. So yeah, that is quite a well-read point, we see. Right. Anyone else want to come in on this, or shall we go to a decision? So we've had no, I think we're ready to go. So we've got the recommendation as per the report, moved by Councillor Healy, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Stockwood. And so if we're happy to go ahead to the vote, please, I think.
With the additional...
Well, no, yes, and with the condition that the condition that Councillor Clark requested, which I think is a very good idea, because the heritage and the conservation area. And then Councillor Golan is speaking. Are you speaking, Councillor Golan? Or
I was just saying.
I can see you now. Sorry?
I'm pretty sure it's already on the plans.
That was my impression, and we could certainly see something on there, but perhaps to be on the safe side, we should clarify it in the conditions. So, because we can't really say we want to see something there, but if we say in the condition that we would like to see that feature retained. Mr. Pegram.
Chairman, I know this is late in the day, but I'd like to actually recommend an additional condition myself, which I'm not sure is covered, but a concern was expressed with me, I think by yourself, about the removal of that side elevation of the coach house. And I think in those circumstances, it might be prudent that we have a scheme to demonstrate how that part of the building is going to be removed without threatening the integrity.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. I did raise
I do apologise for raising it late, and hopefully with the forbearance of the move in the second.
Yes, and I apologise. I had meant to mention that, but yes, the proposal to remove some of the lower wall on the side of the building to allow the parking underneath, which I think is a good idea. But at the same time, I had a slight worry in my mind that physics being physics and all the rest of it, we need to ensure that everything is done as much as possible to ensure that no unintended consequences of walls falling down happen, if that makes sense.
And be reinstated if they do, Mr.
Indeed, yes. And that's so that was the point that Mr. Pegram was very, very conveniently reminded me of. I had raised that, but I forgot to mention it tonight. So if we're happy with that. Yep. So Mrs. Sells, please.
Can I just check Councillor Healy and Councillor Stockwood are happy with that additional condition?
Yes, indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Councillor Stockwood?
Yeah, Councillor Stockwood.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So running through then, Councillor Butler.
For.
Councillor Clark,
4,
Councillor Goland,
4,
Councillor Healy,
4,
Councillor Major,
4,
Councillor Mason,
4,
Councillor Murray,
4,
Councillor Purdue-Horan,
4,
Councillor Stockwood,
4,
Councillor Thomas,
Against.
and Councillor Verdi.
4.
Thank you all. That's 10 for, 1 against, so the motion carries.
Right, thank you very much. That's a good, interesting discussion on that, and decision has been taken, and so as per the report and original recommendation with the extra conditions on. So that was the final item on tonight's meeting. So thank you for attending. Just before we close, at the last meeting, or if you like, the first part of this meeting a couple of weeks ago, I reported that it was Mr. Cox's final meeting that night. Well, of course, it turns out that he's had another final meeting, because tonight will be his final meeting. So I have a feeling he's left the office. I think he's probably gone. But
I think he has, Chairman, but he can watch the recording back if he see any comments, obviously.
So so we thank Mr. Cox for his time at the borough, and wish him well for his next venture. And so with that, we have no other items on the agenda. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks' time, which is as per the original schedule. So I think that's the 13th of May. So we'll close the meeting at 18 minutes past 9. So thank you all for your contributions, and good night. Thanks.